Hello, ED531. This is Tim. This is my submission for assignment 2B. I'm talking about our social group membership profile and answering the corresponding questions. So to start out, I'll go through my results for the social membership profile, different identities associated with, and then talk a little bit about the different questions that are posed for this assignment. So just going through little by little each item. As far as gender goes, I identify as male and identify that as a dominant group or an agent group. For ethnicity, Caucasian specifically in terms of cultural background, country wise, Irish, English, Austrian, and Russian. And I have that in as dominant and Asian agent group, given our current socioeconomic system and cultural system and how I think it's perceived. But obviously, within each one of those groups, there are some different characteristics as well. Sexual orientation, identified as heterosexual, also a dominant or agent group. For age, I am 30 years old, millennial. And for that, I put subordinate and target group. Reasoning for that is I think that as a younger professional, sometimes age becomes an issue in terms of how people perceive your opinions and perceive what you bring to the table in professional settings, regardless of what your expertise may be and things like that. For class, middle class, identified as a dominant or agent group. For religion, I have spiritual with no religious affiliation, and I have that as a subordinate and target group because through my life experiences, sometimes when identify as not having have a specific religious faith, that has been an issue for some people. Ableness and disability, identify as able, also a dominant or agent group. My use of English, that is my first and only proficient language, identified as being using English regularly, so identifying as a dominant and agent group. And for the other purposes, I did leave that blank because I think that within the other identities, I'm able to really using those just form who I am. So looking at that list, going through the quick bullet points at the bottom of the membership profile, the identity that I think of most often is my ethnicity. Identity I thought about least was ableness versus disability. Identity giving the most privileges and benefits. I combine gender and ethnicity. I think as a male and Caucasian that they both come with privilege. Identity that hurts, as I said before, age. Identity that I know least but would want to know more is the dynamic of class, specifically even identifying as middle class. What is within the middle class? Are there different variations and discrepancies that might occur? The identity that has the strongest effect on how I see myself, I did put ethnicity. Again, I think that that is a big part of who I am and how I identify. And then the greatest effect, positively or negatively, on how others see me, I did also say ethnicity. So uh, moving on, talking about how these different identities have shaped my life and some of the different questions that we're considering for this purposes of this assignment. The community that I was raised in is a relatively, I guess, small city, large town in New Jersey, Perth Amboy, New Jersey. It was a heterogeneous town in that there was a lot of diversity that did exist there. And I actually was in the minority there. Perth Amboy, New Jersey has, I believe I talked about this in the first video, now an 85% uh, Hispanic Latino population. When I was in school, I think the number was in the high 70s, about 80. So for me, that was a very interesting dynamic because even though, in terms of how I think the broader society sees me as far as ethnicity goes and socioeconomic class goes, in my upbringing in my community, I was a minority. There were very few Caucasians actually in my classes and my schools, which was pretty fantastic as far as I'm concerned in terms of how I grew up. Because I grew up with an inherent diversity and open mind because it was what I was used to. The real, I guess, wake up call for me was not during my upbringing, but moving into the college setting and becoming a member of a community that where many other people looked more like I did, and there was not a minority of Caucasians, which sounds a little bit odd, but that was eye-opening for me. But it was very, very beneficial to me, I think, growing up, because it gave me perspective. It gave me an appreciation for culture. It gave me an appreciation for different backgrounds, and it sort of shaped the way that I want to or wanted to move my life forward in terms of an understanding of cultural identity and respect for the culture and values of others. Considering aspects that I am most proud of, the two that I think I would go into it starts with ethnicity. I'm very proud of my background. As I said, I'm not just from one family background in terms of culture. I do have a variety of different cultures in my heritage. As I said, Irish, English, Austrian, Russian, and actually a little Mongolian in there, which is kind of a fun fact. But I identify strongly with each of those, and because there's such a degree of difference, even though they are all, Anglo-European countries, and some Asian influence, with a large Caucasian population within each one, there's their own intricacies and traditions that uh, are celebrated differently and vary from one to the other. So those differences had a tremendous impact in terms of developing not just an understanding for being Caucasian as a whole, but considering each one of those individual elements from each one of my backgrounds. So I identify very, very strongly, and I'm very, very proud of those. And I am also very proud, I think, in terms of the class that I am in. And I say that because it's a testament to my parents and to my family in terms of how hard they worked. And, they were not people of means. They were, yes, they were Caucasian. So certainly that, I think, in American society was a positive factor for them, but by no means were they rich. They had to work for what they had, and I was able to live a pretty comfortable life because of that, and I've moved into that as well. So I am proud of that, and being able to maintain that through my hard work. Considering now the least proud of or ashamed, I don't think I would say ashamed, but I would look through the lens of the ethnicity as well, as I'm very proud of it. But I also think that as a whole, the Caucasian population has also been a source of strife for many other underprivileged groups, many marginalized groups. So I wouldn't say anything about necessarily being ashamed, but confused, and also keeping that in check in terms of my own outlook and how others might perceive me simply because of that, given what the whole of my ethnic group has been a part of. And I think the piece about religion comes into play too. Most of my friends were of some Christian denomination. In my family, the background was of Christian and Jewish descent, but neither one of my parents was very religious, and we were not raised religious. We celebrate holidays and things like that, but that was sometimes a source of discomfort because they would always discuss it. And my brothers and I were not from that realm. We weren't from that world. Now we had the ability. Our parents made it very open to be able to, attend services and be engaged in learning about religion, but it was never a practicing part of our life. So that certainly came into play during my upbringing as well. Looking at the questions regarding a time that I felt or noticed that I was different. I mean, this was very early on, I think, for me, as I said, because of the makeup of the town that I was in. The I'd say probably 80 to 90% of the classes I was in again were Hispanic, Latino students. The other makeup of it was other minority African American students and South American students, and then it was a few Caucasians here and there. So very early, I realized that I was different from the people that I was around. But what was very interesting was moving into my college years and my professional life, having it transition into being part of the majority, if you will, and what that dynamic was. So I did notice that I was different pretty early on. In terms of privilege, I will look at at class, at ethnicity, and at gender. And I think I've talked a lot about the ethnicity part of it already. But as far as gender goes, as a male, unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, we are still a perceived as a male-dominated society, and the outlook of men being better than women or more capable than women is unfortunate, and as far as I'm concerned, is not true. But I think that there are times where that has definitely been a privilege combined with being Caucasian, being middle class, being heterosexual. It's sort of a combination of all of my characteristics have given me privilege throughout my career in higher education and trainings and things like that. There are these kinds of exercises very similar to what we're working with these membership profiles that have you take steps forward and back based on different criteria and whatnot. And I always am in the category of having the most privilege, and that's something that I have to identify, and it's something that I try to hold in check when I'm dealing with others and having conversations with students and things like that, because I have to recognize my privilege and check my privilege and understand how that may be perceived by others, and what type of dynamics may be in place that are just barriers that are put up solely based on these characteristics before you even are engaging in any kind of conversation. And then looking at people experiences and institutions that have influenced me today. I think that it's first and foremost is my family. My upbringing, as I said, was unique in that we celebrated diversity. We were in a location where we were not the majority, and my parents gave us a tremendous amount of latitude to learn and to speak to all different kinds of people of all different ages. We were the kids who at a social function, maybe talking to the adults one time and then talking to the people our age. I think the other influence was the culture around me. I mean, even to this day, my best friends for the most part are Hispanic, Latino people I went to grade school, high school, and I'm still very good friends with today. And there's an influence of that in who I am as a person and how I engage with people. So that certainly had an influence. And then looking at media portrayal and how society would view me versus how I view myself. Again, I'm in a class and a gender and sexual orientation and ethnicity that is afforded privilege, and is by that class and those groups is perceived as being a certain level and being viewed by others on those preconceived notions, whether or not they know as an individual that I fit into whatever those stereotypes or those common conceptions are. And then in terms of messages about culture, it's interesting because as a kid, my friends would always say, "Oh, well, you're white and you're rich," and we weren't rich. Like I said, our parents were middle class. They were working people. They really worked incredibly hard for us, and we certainly did not struggle. But the perception was that because we were white, that we were better off, or we didn't understand some of the struggles that friends might face and things like that. And then in terms of, I guess, how peers and people that I interact with now and how those have shaped things, it baffled me at first as to why those were the conceptions or misconceptions, because I'm very different than I think what the stereotypical white male is in terms of how I interact with people and my characteristics. But you're labeled some of the time, and that was certainly true growing up, and it was something where I then any interaction that I had knew that going into it there would be some impression and some assumptions made that I felt it was my job in my interactions to either confirm or to make them realize that maybe that was not the case. And then with looking at, messages growing up, I think what was really something that was profound for me was when I had a friend who his home life was difficult. Was a young man who was Puerto Rican Dominican, and family life was not good. Did not have very much money, and one day came over and having a conversation. He was getting mixed up with some people who I think were not a great influence on him. And I asked, and I said, why would you do that? And he says, because that's what it's like to be me. That's how I'm going to get ahead. And that was really profound for me to hear, because I had never known that was not a part of my existence, and how I identified in any way. So it was eye opening for me. So that is my analysis for this assignment, and I look forward to discussing it more with you all when we convene. And I look forward to seeing or reading your work as well, and seeing how some of our experiences may be similar. So have a great night, and I will catch up with you all soon.